Hey, what is going on YouTube? My name is James and welcome back to another video. Today we're actually going to be doing the comparison between this beautiful SKX right here, the SKX 009 versus the Seiko Monster. Now this is also a pretty incredible watch. This has been probably a really difficult video to plan, to the point where I've tried to actually write down as little as possible. Usually this booklet is just full of information for my videos, like completely packed. This time I've just sort of know what are the differences with handling them, and I'm just going to try and keep it as raw as possible and like as bare bones as possible, just so it is the pure facts. That's what I want to try and do anyway. But disclaimer as always, I'm no watch expert, I'm just someone who really enjoys watches, and let's just get on with this review, shall we? Let's change perspectives and get into it. Okay, so here we go. Here's both the SKX and the Monster. Now I've individually reviewed both of these watches, so feel free to check them out. I will try to remember to leave a link down in the description, but if not, just click on my channel and you will find them pretty easily. So we're going to start off with the basics facts of each watch. They both are using the 7S26, which is just a really reliable Seiko movement. I can't fault the movement, other than obviously it's not got hacking and manual wind, but you know, for this kind of price range, I don't know if you can really expect that. But let's just do some basic size. So let's start off with case diameter of each watch. Okay, right there we're looking at just over a 42 for the Monster, and for the SKX we are also looking at just over a 42, so the SKX actually is just a tiny bit bigger. Now in terms of thickness with the SKX, you're looking at 13.5 millimeters. You're looking at about 12 and 3/4, about 12 and 3/4, which is crazy. I actually thought the Monster was thicker, which is quite surprising. Lug size is 22 on the SKX and 20 on the Monster. Now let's get into weighing the watch. Now obviously my my SKX is on a Jubilee bracelet right here, the one that came with the Seiko, and my dad's Monster right here is on an aftermarket rubber strap, so we have to take that into account when weighing them. So the SKX comes in at 135 grams, which is not surprising. It is a very heavy watch. And then the Monster on an aftermarket rubber strap comes in at just under 98. Well, let's put it on properly like this. There we go, that's more like it, about 106 grams. So you can probably imagine this on the bracelet it comes on will actually be a lot heavier than this, which is not surprising when you look at the design. But anyway, we're going to get onto all that sort of stuff in a second. Okay, so they both have a 120 click bezel, which both in my opinion feel really great. Now one thing I do prefer on the SKX is obviously you've got this shroud around the outside of the bezel, which makes it really great for gripping and turning, whereas the Monster, you've got this area right here and this area right here. And these are pretty much the two areas you have to rotate it from, because rotating it from like here is almost impossible because of this extra shroud that goes over the case. It's like an extra protection really for the case when you think about it. Now obviously with that loss of like real easeability of moving the bezel the whole way around, like from here and stuff, you do get that extra protection which the SKX doesn't have. This SKX is quite sort of in the open at the end of the day. Sure, it is a very tough watch, and I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying compared to the Monster, you definitely are getting a lot more protection of your watch with the Monster, and at the end of the day, I really do believe this can take a much heavier beating. In terms of like just being solid, robust watches, I get much more of a wrist presence with the Monster than I do the SKX. Like the Monster just feels so much heavier and so much more like an actual tool on your wrist, whereas the SKX feels a bit more sort of, it's definitely a tool watch, but it's a bit more fashionable, you know what I mean? Whereas this has gone pure like, I'm built for a purpose. The next thing I'm going to be talking about is the crown. So the crown is at the 4 o'clock position on both watches. Now the SKX, I actually have a bit of, it's quite, and it's not just me, I've heard about it from many other people, but when you unscrew the crown and go to screw it back up, it's a lot of force. Like it's a lot of force that's got to go into it. It's quite fiddly. It's not exactly the smoothest experience. Whereas on the Monster, I can't fault this crown. Like it just screws up so nicely, it screws out so nicely. It's just a very solid feeling crown. And also I forgot to mention, this is a 2016 SKX and this is a 2001 first gen Monster. The second thing I want to mention is the embossing on the back with the tsunami wave. I don't know if you guys can see that. There we go, kind of. There we go, there's a tsunami wave. So you can see it embossed right there. You can tell it's embossed, but it's nothing crazy. When you look at the back of the Monster and have a look at the embossing on this, it is far superior. Like, they must have changed their embossing somewhere down the road, because this embossing is just absolutely incredible. Like, look how beautiful that is. That is just ridiculous. Like, the embossing on this is just so much more detailed, so much more refined than this. It's crazy that they're both the same embossing, but one just looks far superior than the other. That's just ridiculous. It really is. They're both rated 200 meters water resistant, and they're both very, very well-known diving watches. The next thing I want to talk about is the Lume. So before I show you any Lume shots, I have to make some... Actually, no, let me show you the video I did and see if you can decide which one's which. Here's the video. So in that video, you'll notice one of these is a lot brighter and lasts a lot longer. Now, you'd probably, first off, if you didn't know the watches, like I'm guessing most of you probably already guessed it's the Monster, but if you didn't know your watches, you'd assume it'd be the SKX, because it's like so much newer than this, and also you'd just assume that the Lume would have weared out a bit on this. Well, no. The Lume on this is awful in comparison to this, and I don't know why. I really don't know why. Maybe it's the fact that this is a J model and this is a K model, which means this one's made in Malaysia. Maybe it's the fact that they used better Lume back then. I don't know. Or maybe it's the fact that there's more Lume and it's deeper rooted, as some people have said. But either way, even the hands last longer, and the hand shouldn't, because surely that is the same sort of stuff, right? I don't know. Either way, it's crazy that this is so much better when it comes to Lume than this. Now, in terms of variety, you can get this SKX in black, in the Pepsi, and in the orange. In this Monster, especially now they brought the 3rd generation out, there's endless choices. You have so much more choice with the Monster than you do the SKX. There is a mid-size SKX, the SKX 013, I think it is. But the Monsters, you've just got, even the new Seiko 5 range, which is part of the Prospex line, is now considered the Monsters. You know, there's so many different varieties out there, and there's some really, really good looking Monsters. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of this design. I think it's quite ugly, and I know I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for that. That doesn't mean I don't like it. It's ugly in a good way, as Grobnob said, but it is quite ugly. It's an ugly design, you have to admit. Like, it's just very sort of bold and standard, but well, not standard, but you get what I'm saying. But I still like it. I don't know why. I really, really like it. Personally, I prefer the 2nd generation teeth markers, but yeah, it's still just such a great looking watch, and I love the hands and how legible this is. This is so much more legible than this, but that's not saying this isn't legible, because you can clearly see what the freaking time is with this one, as you can with this one, but this one is more legible. Now, in terms of straps, I can't really speak on. You know, I've got the original Jubilee on this, and this is an aftermarket rubber, but I've heard the bracelets for the Monsters are just far superior to many of the Seiko line. Now, in terms of looks, I think the SKX is much more of a looker, and it's much more iconic than the Monster, but that isn't to say, like I said, that isn't to say the Monster is not iconic, because a lot of people know about the Monster, and they're getting more and more common, or more and more popular, should I say. So personally, I think if you want something that's pure iconic, looks great, reliable, and just works, the Monster, the SKX is a great choice for you, especially now they've been discontinued. You know, you've got that little bit more of desirability to them. Whereas if you're looking for something that's pure robust, tool-like, looks incredible, looks monstrous, that's why it's called the Monster, and comes in many varieties, I'd say the Monster's for you. At the end of the day, this is such a reliable watch, and it's so well built, so robust, and I think you're going to see a lot more of these out and about than you're going to see the Monsters out and about, which makes the Monsters that little bit more desirable. Now, in terms of what I think wins, it's very, very difficult to say, because they're both great pieces, and I don't think either of them deserve to win. I think they deserve to draw, but out of personal preference, just based on aesthetics, I prefer the SKX, but out of pure toolness and just real reliability, I prefer the Monster. So let's change perspectives and finish up this review. So to finish this comparison off, I think they're both brilliant watches, and I find it very difficult to say one wins. Now, just because one is so iconic, I have to say the SKX wins. That's just my personal preference, but I don't think that's fair. I think that's so unfair to the point where I'm actually going to leave a straw poll down in the description. If you click on the link, it'll be the very first link. It will say straw poll, and it'll load up and it'll ask you what you think. All you have to do is click on the SKX or the Monster. It's completely your choice, and I'm abbreviating it, I can't even speak English, to SKX, not SKX009, but SKX versus Monster. So that's all the Monsters lines versus all of the SKX line. I want you guys to vote on what wins, and I want you to share this vote across the community on the Facebook pages. You decide what wins this, because personally, I think the SKX wins, but I think it wins based on unfair bias. And I can't believe I just admitted that in my video, but that's why I want to do this little straw poll, so they both get a fair chance, because I've heard very valid arguments for the Monster that I completely agree with, but I've also heard very valid arguments for the SKX, which I also completely agree with. So I'm gonna have to end it right there. Let me know what you think down in the comment section. Definitely vote, because that's how we're gonna know which one wins, and definitely share that vote between all your friends. I'll see you all again in the next one, guys. Thank you for watching, and peace out.